Hello, I am Ellena Jenks from the Arkbound Foundation. I am the social media manager there, and today I'm talking to Lindsay White from Community Supporters. Would you like to
Hello.
introduce yourself?
Yes, and just so everyone knows who we are, Community Supporters is a fairly new charity. We're not quite a year old yet. We're based down in East Sussex, and we are an environmental education charity. So we try to address social issues and economic issues in the area, with environment being the underlying theme that kind of covers everything, to try and improve the environment at the same time.
You've achieved so much. I didn't realize that you were only a year old because you've got so many projects on. It's amazing.
Yeah. So we kind of hit the ground running a little bit, maybe a bit too fast. I'm hoping we don't kind of fall over,
Yeah.
trip over our own feet. But yeah, we seem to be doing really well. We've got so much support, and to be fair, we did the research at the beginning, so we knew there was a kind of a gap in the market, if you like. So obviously that's been proven over the last sort of 10, 11 months that we've been running, that definitely was the case.
Yeah. I was going to ask, what role does storytelling play in your organisation, in any kind of sense?
Well, I think, in the charity sector across the board, to be honest with you, but yeah, certainly, when we're applying for grants or we're trying to explain to people what it is we're trying to do, you need to sell it, essentially. So you need to be able to show the passion in there and the need. So there's a big part of storytelling in that. But actually, I think as well as storytelling, there's listening plays a big part as well. Like we can't do the work we're doing if we don't actually know what people feel they're missing, or what the problems are in the area. So storytelling isn't the first thing that comes to play, to be honest. It's listening to what the needs are, what the problems are, and doing so sympathetically, because you can't put that into your storytelling if you're just guessing a little bit.
Yeah. So how do you sort of identify that narrative in the local community, and how do you empower like young children, perhaps especially, to kind of embody that story and take it forward and create positive change?
We do so in several ways, I suppose. Every year, for example, we kind of do polls and surveys, so everyone knows in theory, they will know to expect it every year. We run it every May. So we're just kind of coming to the end of running our second survey now, and the questions are the same every year, so we can kind of get a sense of what opinions and what people feel. But also it's just a case of really just sitting down and talking to people. You can't do it any better. It's been a bit difficult with restrictions and not being able to go to certain places and speak to certain people in the way that we would like. But social media does come in and play a big part as well, because there are so many groups out there that are very local, talk about specific things, and you can kind of listen, if you like, and just kind of, it's just taking notes and knowing which bits are relevant, and which bits you can carry forwards and how it feeds into our work. So it's kind of listening and then how you work with that, what's being said.
Yeah. That's definitely something that I'd like our charity to embody more, because I really like that Community Supporters, you're really out on the ground, you're talking to children, you're growing vegetables and litter picking, and you get to see that sort of immediate change in the local community that's so rewarding.
And I think that's the best place to be, really, ultimately. And you see these programs on TV where you've got like CEOs of things of big national companies, and they actually don't really know what's happening on the ground. They're very out of touch from it. And and even in my role as the founder of the charity and the CEO, I don't want to be on the ground as much as everybody else, because that's not my role. But at the same time, I completely envision that from every couple of weeks or so, that would definitely be where I want to be, because I want to be in touch with what's going on, and which volunteers are doing what and what they're feeding back. And it's part of being a team, isn't it, if you're there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about Arkbound? Why? Because Arkbound are publishers, from what I can see from your website, but also a charity, which I find is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Why did that become a route that you decided to go down?
Well, I think we're one of the only non-profit publishers in the UK, actually. I think a bit like community supporters. I remember we were discussing this previously. There are so many things that we want to tackle, and it's very multifaceted. It just made sense to become a charity. So we publish books, but also like journalism articles, and we have a blog and academic articles. We have some of those in the works at the moment, and so we just thought that by being a charity, it's a way of like getting to the heart of the core values that we want to embody. So empowering people and helping disadvantaged authors. So by being a charity, we can have that dialogue that you were just talking about, and at the same time we can access funding a bit easier. So it means that authors don't have to maybe pay as much to access our resources.
Okay, so you'd be very much a service that some of the communities I work in that are really disadvantaged, that probably won't be able to get into that sector quite as easily, would be able to come to you with and get some support.
Yeah, absolutely. We have workshops, we have mentoring schemes, and obviously book publishing as well. And all of those, we do our best to really decrease the kind of barrier that's often there with funding or social media or whatever it is. So that, I mean, it's really important as well we have this idea of the literary canon, and it's mostly written by sort of old, rich, white people. And it's great to kind of break that down and sort of talk back at the publishing industry and say, actually, why don't books reflect their readers? That's a really big sort of gap in the market.
Yeah, so I assume that through that process you offer a lot of help and guidance, because those the sort of people that you're looking to work with are probably less experienced and maybe have had some issues with schooling and things, that just to help them get through the process of publishing something and producing something.
Yeah, absolutely. We did our work with prisoners and people on probation, and they're statistically more likely to have dyslexia or have a lower reading age. So we went in and we helped them sort of workshop and perhaps improve on those skills. But also, I think everyone can see writing as an outlet, and just the power of having a pen in your hand, and it can be a way to access feelings that you didn't realize you had, or articulate thoughts that you maybe hadn't really expressed before.
Yeah, so some very strong connections possibly with mental health services, and how that might, because it's a creative thing. It's a bit like that people use art for supporting mental health, and I suppose it's just a different form of being creative, isn't it?
Yeah. I was going to ask, what's a sort of an issue or an activity, or maybe one of each, that you find people really bond over, and it's a real way of connecting to the local community?
Yeah, well, I think I've done charity work before community supporters. I've been doing it for quite a few years now, and the one thing that we always sort of joke about really is cake.
Oh, really?
tea and cake, but actually food in general, and I think especially with times being as they are and the cost of living increasing ever more so, and obviously food bank price numbers going up, and marketplace numbers going up, that we're seeing that more and more. So actually on Saturday this week we're running our first cookery workshop and growing workshop. So we're going to be taking families that have been signposted to us through nurseries or schools or the food banks and things like that, to come and do a cookery workshop with us, and then in the afternoon going around to the allotment. And we were kind of thinking 10 seemed like a good number.
Yeah.
and we'd probably filled that within a day or two of it being out there, which, considering it was invite only, so we've kind of doubled that. And we're hoping that we could just fit everybody in, because we didn't really want to turn anybody away.
No, of course.
But off of the back of that, even though we haven't run that session yet, we're already thinking, what can we do next and how can we do it next? So we've already secured funding to actually take that further, but thinking about kind of the bigger picture, because if people don't have the money for the food and ingredients, do they necessarily have the money for the equipment or the energy costs and things like that? So we're kind of looking at how we can also maybe through a voucher scheme or something, be able to cover some of those other costs as well. So I think it's quite interesting, but food is definitely the one that brings people together, even if it's an event and you just offer refreshments on the side. That tends to be,
I love that.
Everyone talks about food. It's like the weather, isn't it? You either talk about the weather or food in this country.
Yeah, it's great. I was going to mention, I was scrolling through your Instagram and I saw like all of the really interesting recipes that you give about using up, I think it's old yogurt this week, making like lollipops and donuts, which was really surprising.
Yeah, that was today.
Yeah. I was just wondering if you wanted to talk a bit about how accessible it is to kind of use up those sort of maybe food that's about to go off, or yellow label vegetables, those sorts of things?
Yeah, well, so it's something that we're starting to look at. So I mean, ultimately, we kind of have a really big focus on accessibility, and I think when most people think of accessibility, they're kind of thinking of like mobility and you know, how to get about the place. But it can encompass so much more than that, and obviously, food is one of the things that people really need access to. So we're kind of at the moment really focusing on how we can make some changes there and how we can support people, but without it being just giving stuff away and being handouts. You know, it's because I mean, I've been on that side of the fence, and it's you don't always want to be the recipient and feel like you're, you know, being given handouts. You kind of, you know, want to work for it and earn it. So we're trying to work out how that looks. But I think, you know, doing soft touch stuff through our websites and things like that. I mean, that, to be fair, some of those things we've had out this week have been really popular, and it's only things that I actually make myself at home. And the recipe that we had out yesterday for yogurt bread, 50-50 flour and yogurt, we do that at our beach and forest schools because it's just such a simple thing for the kids to make, and you can put it on the barbecue and make a flatbread. But that one simple dough can, like you say, it makes the donuts. You can make pizza, you can make pinwheels, you can do so much. You can make it in bulk. And yogurt you can buy in big tubs, you know, and it's like £1. So actually it's really affordable at the same time, and has multiple uses. So we're trying to get some of those messages out. And it seems to be working so far. So
yeah, and as you say about wanting to kind of not just be given something, but know how to continue that, and with you know, you're not in that way, you're not just giving people sort of maybe processed food, you're giving them recipes that they can then adapt and, you know, work into their own daily life, and it's also maybe a bit healthier than other options. Yeah,
and like I said, it's just thinking about what their situation might be. You know, it's like, it's all very well and good saying you can batch cook this and put 6 portions in the freezer, but what if you don't have a freezer, or you've only got like a little freezer drawer or something and you don't have that capacity? You know, so we're trying to kind of think of ways that we can work around all the different scenarios, and just kind of generally make it easier for people. Yeah, that's something that maybe we've been thinking about as well. And it is just a kind of very lightly conscious thing. So like running giveaways and things like that. So people might not have the money or feel that they can spend the money on buying our books. But, you know, if we run events that are quite cheap, or just give books away for free, basically, then that can be a good way for people to access the written words and stories, and sort of have a bit of escapism, maybe. And I believe you do workshops or something like that. I assume, you know, thinking with what people may or may not have in their homes, I assume that could be accessed anyway. You know, if they wanted to go to the library and use a library computer and do that sort of. Yeah, absolutely. We're running an event next week in memory of David Onamade, who was a poet who sadly died just before his work was published. But one of my favourite poems in the collection is about the library, because he was homeless, and so going to the library was this really lovely place for him. And he writes about how important it is and how quiet and hushed it is. And as you say, it's just really important that people can access those spaces. So when we run workshops, if they're in person, we'll provide all the equipment. I'm sure you guys do the same. And online, again, we can support people in various ways and send them out equipment as well. Yeah, I think it's just so important, isn't it? Because you don't want to, you just want to like stop all the barriers as much as possible, really, don't you? And that's kind of where we are with it. I mean, one of the other accessibility projects that we're running at the moment, which launches on Monday, so this is why I've got a busy week this week, is we're looking at communication and how people communicate verbally. And what we managed to do is we were granted some funds from our local council, and with that we've been able to put signage boards up in play areas, children's play areas across the whole district, which has British Sign Language on it, so you can learn how to sign the alphabet. So you can, you know, if anything you wanted to say, you could finger spell it. You could learn some basic signs that relate to playing, so like play or swing or slide, those kinds of things. And it's just to try and encourage people to communicate in a different setting, out and about. Yeah, and that launches, like I said, it launches on Monday. And we're also doing workshops and things through schools that have signed up although unfortunately not as many as they'd like. I think they're a bit busy trying to catch up and things at the moment, which is unfortunate, but that's a really popular project as well.
I think that's fantastic. And again, that links to our values in terms of sort of tolerance and wanting it in a way. I was thinking about this, how when we read a book, we kind of assume that we're reading from our own perspective, but we're not. We're sort of we're filtering the author's perspective and life view through our minds. And in that same way, just learning to kind of understand other people's viewpoint of the world and communicate with them is so important. And especially in the space where children are playing, I think that's a really lovely way of doing it.
Yeah, and I think it's just helpful, especially in what we're doing, to be able to see it from the other person's perspective, and kind of almost be in their shoes. Because how can you going back to the storytelling, how can you do the storytelling to get a grant to support those people to run a project if you can't see it from their point of view? Which is why I say listening is so important. Yeah.
Would you like to tell me some more about the Young Pollinators program, because that sounds really interesting?
Yeah, that's I mean, it's still in development at the moment, and it's certainly not something we've got any funding for, but it's definitely something that we'd like to do. But essentially what we want to do is we want to be able to take a cohort of teenagers, 13 to 19, or whatever it works out to be, and give them the opportunity to essentially mirror what we're doing as a charity. So although they're not of the age where they could legally run a charity or a business or anything themselves and do all of those, they can mimic what we do. So they can run their own trustee meetings, they can do their own risk assessments, they can plan their own projects, go and find the funding for it, run the projects themselves, and everything that is involved in that. But we want it to be their decision.
Yeah.
So essentially we would be the facilitators of that. And if they want to go and campaign for new litter bins, they can. If they want to go and learn about a particular species, we can go and find the training for them. If they want to do first aid, it could be anything. And I just want to give them the opportunities. And that's kind of come about because pre-pandemic, I was running a STEM club for sort of 6 to 12, so slightly younger. And one of the projects that we did in January 2020 was that we were aiming to get them a CREST award, which is a nationally recognised certification. And what they had to do to earn it was to research local environmental project issues. So, not like glaciers melting or anything, but local issues that were affecting us directly. Research those and then kind of come up with a solution. And it could be anything they like. And like I say, we just gave them the resources, the computers, the access to the library, whatever it was. And that was kind of what the project was going to be at the end of the day. They had a month to do it. The following month, we were going to be talking and looking at public speaking and how you present yourself to a room full of people. So we were kind of thinking completely different, doesn't draw a line at the end of the January, and then we move on and do a different project. And the way it ended up working out was that they'd done such a good job with their environmental thing that they ended up doing like posters and one child did an animation. He'd never done animation before, so he self-taught himself. Nobody showed him how to do it. Learned how to do an animation. Another group did a PowerPoint presentation, etc. And then the next month, we had been invited to our local council to have a tour around the council, and then to go into the council chamber where they obviously do all their public speaking and make decisions, etc. And when they got wind of the projects that they'd been working on, they were then asked to present their projects in the council chamber to a range of councillors that had been selected to be there. So they'd gone from a little project to this is what's going to happen. And there was one project in particular that was about pollinators, actually. So this is where the names come from. And they liked the project idea so much that they kind of wanted to run with it as a council, which certainly wasn't on the cards because I don't particularly want to work with bees too much. I can leave that for somebody else. I mean, that obviously didn't happen because that's, March onwards, that was kind of when lockdowns and stuff started. So it's never kind of come to fruition, but the impetus was there, and it's some of those children that want to take that forwards. They still want to, they got so kind of involved in that they wanted to take it forwards, but it's just a case of how and finding the right timing and getting some funding together to do it. So watch this space.
That's amazing. I love that. And it's so important, I think, to show young people that they can enact change in the community, because especially with everything that's going on in the world, it's so, I mean, it's scary enough as an adult, but for children, I imagine they must see all the problems and not really know what to do about it, but feel that it must be such an easy fix. And so the fact that they were able to really like go from a sort of a more small scale project to having being in a council chamber is just amazing. I really hope that gets picked up again.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting as well, because whenever we go into schools and do talks and stuff, it's like you're talking to the converted, because they know it all already and they're almost telling you the stuff before you've had a chance to tell it to them, which obviously you don't get so much with adults. So they do kind of know it already, and they haven't got to the age, I think, where they've been kind of blockaded so much that they stop having ideas. You know, they can still be quite imaginative, and there are no limits. You know, so the younger you get, the less limits they have, and it's obviously where sci-fi things come from, but sci-fi things come to fruition eventually, don't they? You know, so I think they probably actually have the answers there in that generation, and we just need to listen to them.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we're thinking about as well. Not so much with young people. I'd really like to run an event to do with that, but we have our book Climate Adaptations, which we sort of we aimed it to release in time for COP26, which it did. And that was from authors all over the world who are impacted by climate change and how we can adapt to it. And I think that's one of our most hopeful books, in a way, that we can actually adapt to climate change, and society might collapse, but we can, I think one of the collaborators said that we can rise from the ashes like a phoenix. He uses that analogy. And I think that's really hopeful, and just finding the solutions is really key.
Yeah, so yeah, as an organisation, you have quite a big focus on that particular field as well, then.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of our sort of key passions. So the organisation itself, we make sure that all of our books are printed on recycled paper, and just from the nature of everyone working from home, we're low on carbon, and the office space we use is shared. So everything is done with the environment in mind.
Yeah, I think that's the way that a lot of organisations need to go forward, certainly. I noticed as well from your website, having a quick look, that you do focus a lot on education, and in particular, you also, as well as books, you also publish like scientific papers and things like that. But I didn't really get a chance to really like delve in and see what that was all about. So could you share a bit about that?
Yeah, it's something that we haven't done for a while. I think there are a few sort of in the works. I think one of the last things we published was a report, and again, I think that was to do with climate change. And we just really want to highlight that we can adapt to it. And I mean, we just want immediate change to happen, as most people do. That would be fantastic if the government could start putting in these adaptive measures now. That would be incredible. And so a lot of our books and the scientific papers kind of back that point of view up.
Yeah. So I guess with that in mind, I mean, we certainly work with our local councils quite closely on all three tiers that we have here. And even our MP is very supportive. Do you do anything along those lines at the moment, or is it something that you'd want to do in the future?
It's something that we'd want to do in the future, I think. We have a lot of our staff have quite like a variety of roles in the community, but I don't think it's something that we've sort of consciously aligned with. Yeah, but I think that would be amazing. And Bristol is such an amazing space. I really think if we could get some events going, there's real untapped potential there, I think.
Yeah, because I think the issue that we have when we speak to people is kind of, when you're trying to talk about climate change in particular, and to be fair, as a charity, we really try to avoid using that as a term, because you can instantly see people glaze over. So it's twofold, isn't it? It's how do you persuade or talk to those people and say, well, the little things that you can change in your life are actually going to make a difference. But also at the same time, how do you take that forwards to the people who can make the big differences? Or is that, I mean, it's probably within our role, but is it a role of everybody to try and carry it forwards, or should those people essentially be listening? That's kind of the question, I suppose. Not one that you could answer, obviously, but just to put it out there.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a bit of both. So I think it's just about being real with it, as sort of weird as that sounds. So we recently did a social media post where how you can reduce your carbon output just in cooking. So things like putting a lid on a pan, boiling the kettle instead of heating water on the stove, those kind of things that people, it's not overwhelming, but they can just adapt it into their daily life. And then at the same time, we have some poetry collections that are about coping with climate anxiety. So we completely acknowledge that, as you say, it's a massive, it's sort of a tsunami of an issue that people just don't want to know about. And then at the same time, as I've just said, you know, calling on action from government and different stakeholder groups.
Brilliant. And I think working with different groups and stuff, do you find you have to adapt you know, the way that you present things or the way that you speak, just because of, you know, if you're working with a mental health group compared to, like you say, you go into prisons and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very aware of the language that we use. And I would also just say, like, the diversity of what we publish. So we have a poetry collection from a young girl who is autistic. And again, it's just about making sure that there's a wide range of different books there for different readerships. And at the same time, breaking down those barriers so that it's easier to have those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Do you also publish in, you know, like voice books, for example, or ebooks?
Yeah, it's something that we're working on. I think we have a few, but it's something that we want to do more of, because I think a lot of people are getting their books online now. I mean, it's more environmentally friendly, but it's also just easier when you're, you know, on the train or whatever it is. So it would be great to have that as a bigger platform, I think.
Yeah, I think so. You know, with everybody, you know, there's a lot of people now that sort of access podcasts and things like that, which I think is quite interesting. You know, and I want to investigate it a little bit further as to whether it's sort of better to have a written book or whether it's better to, you know, to have it, you know, in the same way that is it better to make a phone call or to send an email?
Yeah. You
know, from an environmental point of view. I think that would be quite an interesting, and you know, I know there's already books that cover things like that, but you know, I just think that's quite an interesting area that, you know, if we get enough volunteers, because obviously at the moment we're only a small team, that might be quite a nice little project to work around.
Yeah, certainly. And as you say, it's things that we use, you know, technology in our everyday life, and yet we don't fully understand the impact of it and how much water it consumes and how much carbon it releases. And I think having that in a digestible form would be really helpful for most people.
Yeah, like I say, it's just kind of seeing the bigger picture of it all, isn't it? You know, that data has to be stored somewhere. You don't send an email and then it's disappeared. It's still stored somewhere. You know, and that's obviously drawing power and etc. and workforce, I assume, to maintain that. But you know, like I said, that feeds back like we're doing with our food project. It's not just ticking that one box. It's having a look at, well, what else can you do? What else is relevant that you haven't thought about that, you know, might change how you look at it.
Yeah. Would you like to tell me some more about your forest schools? Because you've mentioned them a few times, but would you like to just tell me a bit more about them?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of where we started, to be honest with you. So when we started up, I'm beach school trained, so I can run beach school sessions. And a colleague of mine is trained to run forest school sessions. So to begin with, I suppose it was a quick win, because we can hit the ground running. As soon as we got our charity number, we were doing them within a couple of weeks. You know, as soon as we got a little bit of funding from a funder who has a very quick turnaround, luckily. And so that was the very first thing. So last summer, that's pretty much, you know, what we did. And it's where we had the expertise, so we could be confident in, you know, what we were saying and what we were teaching was right. And it's kind of just grown from there. So, I mean, we've kind of spoken about it a little bit recently, because there are a lot of people that facilitate those sort of things in our area, and they are really popular across the country. So, you know, rather than taking away from businesses that are trying to do those things, we're now kind of probably stepping back a little bit. It was good to start off with, and we're not going to completely stop them. We'll probably still do things like, you know, like this summer, we're doing a series of 5 beach school sessions that are all themed around being shipwrecked. So we're shipwrecked on the beach, and one of the sessions we're going to be looking at how would you survive with food and drink. You know, where would you go for those things? How would you get it? And the second one, we're going to travel down the coast a little bit, and to a place that actually, because of the way the waves work, that gets a lot of things washed in off of the tide. So we can do a bit of a scavenger hunt and then try to build a shelter from what we find. We've got a session where we're looking at being rescued. How would you be rescued? How would you make sure you're rescued? And teaching things like semaphore, or building a giant SOS or flags, or whatever they come up with. And then there's just a really big sort of party at the end of the last session, where we're hoping to get a couple of maybe some drumming groups down and do some drumming workshops, and some sea shanty singers down, because we live quite close to Hastings, and in Hastings every year they do a really big pirate festival. So we've made links with them, and hoping to do some stuff at the end just to kind of celebrate the end of the project. And that is just because we've kind of themed it. I think it's kind of brought about a bit more imagination, and so many people have wanted to sign up, even though we haven't actually completed the like organisation of it.
It sounds amazing. I can just feel the potential for stories from that. And I think that's great. I can really imagine children sort of going wild with the idea of being shipwrecked, and it's the sort of thing that you might imagine as a child, and then getting to actually engage and enact that adventure is really cool.
Yeah, well, I suppose the kind of irony of it is that we were going to do it a couple of years ago, 2019, but I was pregnant at the time, so kind of couldn't. But the idea came from a book about shipwrecks that my partner was reading at the time. And he we were sitting in the hospital while I was having my maternity checks and stuff. And he was like, "Oh, look at this! This is really interesting. And read this bit. This is really interesting." And it was kind of about, but it touched on all of those things, like all about food and what you need, and this, that, and the other. And because he got so excited about it, and then we were kind of like, well, what if we tried to emulate some of that?
Yeah.
Because we do all of those activities in beach school anyway. But yeah, I think it just gives it another level of excitement, hopefully.
Yeah, and by reframing it into like a survival situation, it really helps participants to sort of rely on themselves, I imagine, and sort of know that if they were shipwrecked, they could survive, and that's quite empowering as well.
Yeah, but also I think we found speaking to people in particular, and especially children that are in the most disadvantaged. So we've got an area here that's within the worst 10%. When you look at the deprivation figures for the country. So we've got some really high deprivation figures in that area in particular. And it's when you talk to those families, even though we're 20 minutes, half an hour walk from the beach, they just don't go.
Oh, wow, really?
We've got children that are like sort of 10, 11, 12, never been to the beach. Or they go to the beach and they don't know what to do there. Because we've got a shingle beach. And it's not a tourist destination as such. It's not like Hastings or Eastbourne where they've got attractions and there's that sort of thing to do. It's more of a leisure beach, and they just don't know what to do. So when we kind of were speaking to them, you've got the older generation that were kind of saying, well, we go along, we walk the dog along the prom because we can't access the beach because mobility issues, or people that just go and sit for the day, maybe go and have fish and chips and then come. They're just, that's kind of limited. What people do. So it's also trying to say to people, and not just with the beach, it's just through our forest schools and getting out in the countryside, is it's not just somewhere to walk, it's not just a nice place to sit, it's what else can you do, how can you make an activity there, how can you, what else can you do?
Yeah, one of our books is about reconnecting with nature, and a lot of it is about sort of meditation and those sort of holistic things. But I think a big part of it is just taking your shoes off and walking barefoot on mud and things like that really help you to engage in like the landscape as it is, and just discover the local area more. And I was wondering sort of how would you encourage people to do that? Is it about going out and doing your groups, or do you also encourage them to take that on and just maybe spend more time in nature in general, or read about it, anything like that?
It's quite difficult. I think it's more difficult with adults.
Yeah.
I think the older you get, the more reserved you get, and you don't want to get muddy, and you don't want to. And I get that, because I don't want the kids painting at home, and I don't, you don't want to have to deal with the clear up. So it is quite difficult. But with our beach and the forest schools, we don't run them. We don't take the children and the parents go, which some groups do. Like we could if we wanted to. Without a problem, but ultimately we know full well, like I say, the kids know it all. We want to get the parents, we encourage the parents to play with their child essentially, but then the messaging is actually going direct to the parent, or it's trying to build those it's just everything is done in such a subtle way.
Yeah.
So you're coming to us to do a beach or forest school, but through stealth, you're building bridges with, making bonds with your child, or you're getting dirty, or you're whatever it might be. I mean, one of the projects that's starting in a couple of weeks' time is a women's support group, because one of the things that came out through conversations, certainly last year, was how a lot of women were kind of feeling very overwhelmed with lockdowns and having to homeschool and having, to deal with the anxiety of what if we get sick, or losing their jobs. I mean, I lost my job last year, which is where this has come from. And there's arguably been more pressure on women in many ways. Not to say that other people haven't felt pressures at all, but that's kind of what was coming out, what we were hearing. So we've got this women's group starting, and the aim for that is just to try and completely change their setting, get them doing things that they've probably never done before. Yeah. So we've got things like basket weaving, and we're going to do some woodwork sessions, which I think is sort of like, you hear of men's sheds, and they're brilliant, some that, but you don't get a women's shed. And I get why men's sheds are there, but it's an activity that maybe other people would, so trying to give those opportunities, and yoga out in the woods rather than, in your living room or wherever you might normally do it, and just kind of thinking, what opportunities could we give that might help them feel like an individual again.
Yes,
or
absolutely.
Or give them, because I think the trouble is as well, when you look at career paths even, I mean, when we started off doing the STEM club back in 2017, I think it was, the first thing we asked all the children is what do you want to be when you're older, and what do you think you could be if you stayed living here? And obviously there was a range of different questions for the first one, as you would expect, but the second one was largely the kids saying, well, if I stay living here, I'm going to have to either go into care work or work in a shop, because that's kind of all you can see in our town. I mean, there's obviously more here, but it's obviously not so obvious to children. And that's kind of what we were trying to break down through our STEM club, by looking at different careers each month and different pathways, and sort of saying, all these people do all these things and they haven't moved away. Maybe to go and study, but that's natural for anybody. But you can come back and you can do these things here. But it's trying to get those same messages across to my generation or adults that may be looking to change a career. But you've got to give them the opportunity to sample what that is. Yeah. If they don't know it exists, how do they know they want to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about the forest sort of atmosphere. It's changing the context, and if putting somebody in a completely new environment, and then them being able to sort of see with perspective. I suppose it's all about perspective, and we were saying earlier on about other people's points of view and being in other people's shoes, and just seeing other opportunities and asking why not, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think if you're asking people to focus and have a passion for changing and improving the environment, that's not going to happen if they don't first appreciate it. No. And you're not going to appreciate that looking out your window, I don't think. Especially if looking out your window, you're just looking at somebody else's house or a brick wall, or
yeah.
You need to be out and experience. And so we're not going to change the world with what we're doing, but maybe we can change a life or a couple.
I think that's the important thing, though, isn't it? It's about little so-called little things that have massive ripple effects over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think once one person learns it, then I remember as a child we used to go out quite often and walk through the farmers' fields, and like my parents would be like, there's an oak tree and there's a so and so and there's so and so, and if you do this, if you pick this plant, it can do this. In the same way we used to go and have holidays on the beach. This is a mussel and this is a clam, and this is and these ones are edible and these ones are not, sort of thing. And it was quite interesting when I did my beach school training. That I was the only one there that wasn't born and bred coastal, and so my assumption was that actually I'd be less of an expert, because they've lived here all their lives. They should in my head they should know a lot of those things, and actually it was the other way around, which was quite interesting. So that's kind of stuck with me as well, to kind of think, well, the people that live here probably actually know more about inland then they do their own doorstep. Whereas actually it's their own doorstep that we need to be protecting, and let everybody else in their own patch protect their own patch, and then everybody's done their bit and everything's protected.
Yeah, absolutely. And just forging that connection, as you say, like just compassion between people and each other, but also the landscape, and then that all feeds into a changed environment, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think it's just, you know, I mean, not without giving out too much information, but I'm in my 40s now, and I remember like being a kid and you're walking up the street and saying hello to people, and I mean, I wasn't a fan, I'll be honest, back then. My mum's probably going to watch this at some point and be laughing because she knows that I would have been hiding behind her legs and not saying boo to a goose. But but you don't get that so much now, you know, and you know, and I even struggle sometimes walking down the road. Do I say hello to this person? Do they look like somebody that's going to respond? Or, you know, and it was never like that before that I could recall. So I think it's also about building that community back up and wanting to help your neighbours. And you know, if I grow lettuces, will you grow tomatoes, and we'll have a bit of a swap over if we get an abundance, and all those little things that you know, start to work on a little bit.
Yeah. There's something that I'm a student in Aberystwyth, about to leave, but I've really loved being here because of that really strong sense of community. There are always beach cleans going on, and I work in a cafe, and there's communication between all the other restaurants, and we sort of share food waste and that sort of thing. And it really is just about knowing that you're not alone, and that having that communication within the community.
Yeah, I really like that. I've been doing a training course to become a food champion, and it's been run nationally. And there's some people that are in Wales in there, and I have to say, and actually it came up in our last meeting on Wednesday, where they seem to have really like kind of formed quite a good bond, and they're all working together, and so there's obviously something happening in Wales that maybe everyone else should be watching.
Yeah, I really think that is the case. Yeah. I was going to ask you what your proudest moments are, both as a charity and as somebody working for the charity, if you don't mind.
I don't know. I don't think I've got to a point where I could say anything like that, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there's certain sort of bits and pieces that I could say, yeah, because I've done that, it's driven me to do that. But, and it, you know, and I was kind of thinking a little bit about it this morning, and I was kind of thinking that the you know, I haven't pictured myself in this position. Yeah, I was sitting and thinking this morning that you know, what, last year, 18 months ago, somebody sat there and asked me, where do I picture myself in 5 years' time? And my response to them is, I don't picture myself anywhere, because I've had enough experiences in life now to know that the moment I start picturing myself anywhere or having any plans, it's going to change. and 2 months after that conversation is when I lost my job. And so I was like, oh, well, yeah, there you go. I definitely wouldn't have pictured myself. So I don't. And their reaction to that was quite amusing, because they were just like, well, you know, you need to have a plan. You've got to be able to see yourself somewhere in 5 years. You've got nothing to aim for. And I was kind of like, well, I don't aim for anything, because you don't know what the next opportunity is going to be. And if you're aiming somewhere else and an opportunity comes up, A, you might miss it, and B, you might not have the time because you now focus on something else, and that might be the next big thing. So I think with that kind of thought process and thinking is the thing that I'm probably going to end up being the most proud of. Hasn't happened yet. Yeah. You know, I'm still working towards it.
Yeah. It's always such a tough question, because it's who has a 5-year plan? I certainly don't want one. It would be terrifying. I don't know what I'm doing. Well, I do know what I'm doing next week, but you know, like you say, the one constant in life is change. So it's really difficult to imagine that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I speak to some of our volunteers and stuff, and the thing they like about working for us is that there is so much that we can do, in so many directions that we can go in, that you're not doing the same thing every day. And that's one of the main draws. I mean, the other one is the fact that we just tend to be quite flexible with people's needs. So, you know, again, going back to the listening, the first thing that I like to do when I mean, we don't have any staffers yet, although we'd very much like to, and fairly soon, hopefully. But with our volunteers, it's just like, well, what can you offer? What do you want to offer? Where do you want to go? how can we help you with that? And you know, that might be that they need to be flexible because of their childcare arrangements, or you know, they rather do hours in the evening, in which case, you know, that's where they can do our social media stuff, or that's what, you know, they can be listening to the conversations or going out and just doing those sorts of things rather than doing the project work. But I think just because I've experienced that myself in the past, that you know, it's not that I'm unwilling or unable, it's just that, you know, in certain situations I needed to be more flexible. You know, I spent 6 years as a single parent, so I'm not in that position now, luckily, but it really does make it quite difficult to then balance everything.
Yeah.
And although I was in a position at the time where I could have, you know, claimed benefits and stayed like that until my children went to school, that's not the person that I am. I wanted to be out there working and doing stuff and making a difference. But you need to do that flexibly. So I had the hours, but I was doing, you know, a couple in the evenings, weekends, whatever fitted around. And then if I had to change for school holidays, you know, luckily the company I was working for were quite, you know, open to that. So it was a case of, you've got your set hours, as long as you can, you know, account for those, then that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, and think actually I worked harder because of it.
Yeah.
You know, so I appreciated that. So, you know, those sorts of things are what I've carried forward into this, and we want to be completely open to allowing for those sorts of situations.
Yeah, I really admire that the charity is, you're not entrenched. It's like you're a tree. You're kind of just branching off in all different directions, and you have so many projects on the go. It's just really admirable, and I imagine, as you say, very motivational as well to be working for a charity that's so get up and go. And you know, you can, if you think you can make it happen, then you'll try.
Yeah, and I think you know, so it's quite funny because I've spoken to quite a few councillors locally, and they say very similar things. You know, and it's probably all things that local councils want to be doing, but because of the processes of governance and things, that it just takes so much longer to you know, it's got to be voted on and then agreed, and if it's not agreed, it goes back, and you know, and these things happen eventually. But as a charity, we can do them a lot quicker. So that's why I'm quite glad that we have such strong links with the council, because, you know, if needs be, we're more than happy to take some of those things that they want to do and run with it on their behalf.
Yeah.
Or, you know, in partnership with them. You know, and equally, same working with businesses and schools. You know, we don't want to go into those settings and telling them what we think they should be doing, or what we want to put in place for them, and so on and so forth. It's again, it's that working together, listening and talking and building partnerships.
Yeah, I think that's really important for charities, as you say, that we're kind of there we're more of a reflection of society and sort of going in and helping to fill in the gaps than sort of projecting onto it, I suppose. So as you say, just meeting stakeholder groups where they are is really important.
Yeah, I think just generally having conversations. I mean, you know, it's brilliant that we've managed to make a link, because it's not something that, you know, and I appreciate you getting in touch with us in the first place. But it's certainly not something that, even though we're actually in the process of making recipe books and booklets, we were just kind of thinking, oh, like a little printed, like a little paper sort of booklet thing that we could hand out. So you know, the possibilities now that of working forwards in the future and actually producing, you know, something amazing wouldn't have happened otherwise.
And I really like the I think we mentioned before about the women's group and writing potentially poetry or just free verse or something like that, and just again sort of sharing our expertise in terms of like storytelling and engaging with nature would be really, really cool.
Yeah, and speaking about our sort of food workshops and things like that, like I said, at the moment we're working on this recipe book that we got a little bit of funding for that. And that one's all about, you know, what do you do if you're growing stuff at home but you suddenly get an abundance of something, you know, you get so many, you can't give them all away, or you can't freeze them or whatever. But then we were kind of thinking, well, there are also certain recipes that you don't see anymore, you know, like Sussex pond pudding for one, that well, I don't think anyone has the time to make that anymore, because it's very time intensive. And it's not an easy recipe either. From I mean, I've never done it, so I can't judge, but from my understanding. But is there a place to have a book or something printed that has those recipes, and then maybe on the page next to it has a memory from somebody that remembers making it with their mum, or, you know, it's attached to, you know, they made it for their wedding or something like that. So actually you're buying a recipe book, but is there somewhere for stories within that as well?
I love that idea.
You could, so we've we've just secured a little bit of funding for that as well. So we just need to work out how we go about getting those and collecting all that data. But so that's an exciting one to do, you know. And I think actually, you know, there's, I don't know if like care homes and things are really open at the moment to visitors and stuff, but it might be quite a nice one to go in and start breaking some isolation that's been happening over the last couple of years, and you know, and so it kind of ticks quite a few boxes.
Yeah, I did work experience a few years ago for a small sign publisher in Bristol, and while I was working with her, we went into an old people's home, and she'd recorded their life stories about Bristol, and she was sort of playing them back to them, and it was really lovely to hear their stories, and that they got to record their own piece of history, and I think that's just so lovely and important. And again, it really enforces those connections, and also goes back to connecting people through food, which we were talking about earlier on.
Yeah, so it's funny how it all kind of links when you've got it all written down on paper, what you're doing, and you kind of see how it's all connecting, and you know, and where the gaps are that you could fill and stuff. It's exciting.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we're pretty much at the hour, so shall we stop recording for now?
Yes, we can always come back and do round 2 another time, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been such an interesting conversation.
Likewise, thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.